Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Amari's Revenge. The goddess next door is confronted by a Nubian queen out for revenge at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in this inaugural Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Amari's Revenge in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. In a previous video, I said I was walking away from comic social media. And one of the reasons why I'm walking away from comic social media is because comic social media in and of itself is not about going out here to promote the comic medium and tell stories in the medium. No, that environment has become a toxic space, and with it becoming a toxic space, I just wanted to walk away from it for that reason. And I also wanted to walk away from comic social media because the kind of comics that are being produced by many individuals, whether they be Marvel, DC, Image, or even some of the indies, isn't the kind of content that I want to produce. Now, a long time ago in a ghetto far, far away in the South Bronx, I wanted to be a comic book writer. However, when I look at many of the modern comics that are currently being published, these are not the kinds of stories that I want to tell in the medium of comics. Now, my whole style of telling stories in comics is to make comics that are all ages family friendly, and I want to make the kind of content that basically goes up to about a PG or a PG-13 level as related to content. But when I look at the modern comic book industry, I see content that just is way too graphic, and I don't think I'd be a good fit for that comic book industry as a storyteller. Now, the kind of content that I see these days, usually as extremely graphic violence where people are being mutilated, decapitated, and possibly getting their faces split in half. I mean, this is the type of comics that are on many of these online sites as the modern comics, and I'm not a fan of the blood and guts kind of content that is being produced these days at companies like Marvel Comics, DC Comics, Image Comics, Dynamite Comics, and even many of the indies. I believe that that content is way too graphic for the medium and basically takes us back to the dark days of Frederick Wertham and seduction of the innocent. Now, I understand that comic companies want to compete with the video game industry, which has gotten extremely graphic as related to the violence, but at this point, again, as a creator, I don't want to create that kind of content. No, I don't want to tell those kinds of stories because that's not the kind of stories that I grew up with, and I don't believe that this kind of content is healthy for younger readers to go out here and pick up. No, with the medium of comics, I really do believe that comics really do need to, again, dial back all of this blood and guts and get us back to a road where people of all ages can feel comfortable about picking up stories in the comic medium. I really do believe that we really do need to get back on a road where people can feel safe about buying comics, because one of the reasons why I believe the comic book industry is struggling right now is because much of the content is way too graphic as related to violence and even sex, and with it being so graphic, most average everyday people are basically alienated from this content, and they're given a side eye to many of these creators as related to the content they produce. They're giving them a side eye because they're looking at these content that really exhibits antisocial behavior and wondering if there's something wrong with these folks who are producing these comics. That's what I see happening out here as related to the real world. As related to the real world, many people are looking at many of these comics and looking at these creators and wondering if there's something possibly mentally wrong with them. And as a creator myself, I have to look at some of these creators as some of the content with a side eye, because again, we're really stepping out of going beyond even the R-rated zone and going beyond the R-rated zone as related to content, because again, as the medium of comics, you really do want some stories that are all ages, and you really want some of that content to be all ages, because that's how you get new readers who are young to come into the industry. And with there being no gateway for the younger new reader to come into the medium, again, I don't really see a place for myself in that business anymore. And I don't see a place because, again, my aspirations for creating content was to create content that really is in the realm of being, again, all ages, being at PG, possibly PG-13 as related to content, a safe space for readers to feel comfortable of all ages, and a place where you can start forming a relationship with the customer, where you can build some trust with the customer. That's what I try to do here at SJS Direct, and I have built a lot of trust with readers who basically feel safe enough that they can give books like Isis, Esteem, and John Haynes, and even books like Spellbound to their kids. And I would rather try to build that type of business relationship. But when I look at the modern comic book industry, it's become so insular that it's basically walked away from 2 generations of customers, because they're not interested in making that kind of content, whereas I am interested in making, again, the kind of all ages content I grew up with back in the 70s and the 80s and even part of the early 90s. I want to write those kind of stories, but there's no infrastructure to support that kind of storytelling. So that's another reason why I'm walking away from comics social media, because comics social media is not about trying to foster relationships with customers. It's not about trying to foster relationships with younger readers. It's not about looking to build that foundation of trust where people can feel safe about buying a product. No, what I want to do over at SJS Direct is, again, foster that kind of relationship whenever I do all ages books, such as the Isis series, the Esteem series, and the John Haynes series, and even on books where I do push things a little less related to the boundaries, like the books of the Spinsterella trilogy. I mean, these days, whenever I think about producing content, I try to make it as all ages as possible. And yes, sometimes I may go out here and have a character use a coarse language, or there may be some adult themes, but I try to restrain things as related to the content I produce, because I understand the influence of content on people, especially children. So I try to be very careful about the content I curate and produce. So that's one of the reasons why I look at comic social media, and again, and I look at the comic book industry, and I don't really see a place for myself there. No, I mean, recently, about a year ago, I was writing a script for a comic version of Isis, the beauty myth, and I wanted to, again, I thought about doing things and making it a bit more R-rated, but then I pulled myself back and said, you know, you want to make this book for all ages, and I pulled it back to a PG-13. There was a scene in the beauty myth where there was Isis having to be stripped down by Rahima's henchmen, and I put that scene and I made it PG-13 because I wanted it to be in the context of her going to see a doctor, and I didn't want it to be too graphic. So I tried to pull it back as related to things. I know that, you know, you need cheesecake to sell the guys and the girls on comics, but there's a tasteful way to do things, and I don't see people, again, looking to execute concepts in good taste or good faith. And that's a problem for me as a writer and a publisher, because people want to access the content, but the problem is, what I see with today's writers is that they're not making their content accessible. They're not making it accessible to readers of all ages, and they're not making it accessible not just on story entry points, which is a problem. That's a whole nother video in and of itself. But they're not making it accessible as related to creating that safe environment for readers of all ages. Because when I look at a lot of these comics these days where you have people being mutilated, people being decapitated, and people getting hearts torn out, not to mention some of the sex scenes that really get too racy, it becomes a problem because you're trying to sell an everyday audience, but the everyday audience basically is looking at this content and wondering, you know, is there something wrong with dude? Because this is just, it just goes too far. And that's where I see comics. And again, that's not a business I want to be a part of, because I want to be a part of a business that basically is one where we can build trust with the customer, where the customer can come in and know, hey, if I pick up this SJS Direct book, there's not going to be anything too creepy in here. There's not going to be anything too graphic in here. There's not going to be anything too violent in here where I'm seeing blood, guts, and gore, or I'm seeing extremely graphic sex scenes. No, I want people to feel that safety where they can go, hey, I can give this book to a 10-year-old or a child. And like I've had readers do, I mean, I've had readers go out here and say, hey, I can give this book to my kids, and they feel safe about that. And I can go out here and even read these books with my children. I mean, that's what you want as related to books, as related to storytelling, and that's what I wanted to bring to comics. I wanted to tell those kinds of stories that just bring families together, because I've seen people come together. I've seen it in my own family. One of the reasons why I'm so close to my brother and sister is because of comic books, and I want to bring that kind of bond back to people. I want to bring that kind of bond back because, again, reading brings people together. Reading is something that helps people see life, and again, I wanted to do that kind of comic, but I don't see a place for myself in this modern comic book industry, which just, again, creates toxic content, which is a reflection of many of the toxic individuals who are a part of this business. Toxic individuals who basically are in their own world. And one of the reasons why their books don't sell is because they can't connect with real people. They can't connect with real people and show us pictures of real life because they're in their own world, and in their own world they think blood and guts is how you sell the customer. No, that's not something a good publisher does, because yeah, you can make horror comics, but if there's no story to make you care, there's no reason to buy those comics. And the problem I'm seeing with the modern comic book industry is that people don't understand how to sell to people. They don't know how to tell stories about people, and they try to overcompensate with sex and violence. And as they overcompensate, they don't know how to tell a story, and they think being more graphic will draw you in. But being more graphic with blood and guts violence and sex and violence, again, this doesn't really sell stories. No, what sells stories are telling stories about people, and that's something that has been lost on a generation of comic writers who got caught up in the flash of the 90s, but didn't get to learn about the craft of storytelling and the substance of storytelling. And that was one of the things I wanted to contribute to the medium, but sadly I never got a chance to. I really wanted to, again, learn the craft of writing, but I learned the craft of writing outside of comics. I learned it reading books like Sid Field's Screenplay and books like Robert McKee's Story, and reading many writing blogs and learning about techniques of writing. And one of the things that I'm saddened is that I won't be able to apply those techniques to the medium of comics in the mainstream. I mean, that's one of the sad things about things. But I look at this industry, and again, it's not a place I want it to be, with it being toxic like this. I mean, where people are more interested in gossip on social media rather than letting their page tell the story about them. I mean, one of the things that I try to do as a writer is let my page tell the story about me. And when I get on social media, I want you to get to know me as a person and show my character that's what I want to show you as related to these videos. And again, as a comic writer who wrote John Haynes at Death's Door based on my John Haynes series book and Esteem No Good Deed, that's the kind of comics I want to create. I mean, some people say it's a bit of a Bronze Age style, but that in that age we sold more comics than in the history of the medium since the golden age of the 40s. And the reason why those comics sold is because they were all ages entertainment, all ages entertainment that people felt safe about buying. And that's where we're editorial at companies like Marvel and DC are lost. They're not really focusing on, hey, we need to make content that everybody can access, everybody can feel safe about buying. And I know I keep repeating the word safe because safety is something people want. They want to get that trust as related to the business. And that's what I build here at SJS Direct. I want to, when I go out here and I do fiction, I want to build trust with my readers, that they know that when they pick up that book, they know that, yeah, I'm going to get a very compelling story. It's going to be the best that Sean writes, but it's also going to be something I can share with my friends and family and go past to my friends and family. I mean, recently I'm putting fingers to the keyboard for I'm trying to make a light novel in Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer, and I've actually dialed things back as related to the Spinsterella character, because the Spinsterella character, Matilda, was originally, her first two books, Spellbound and Spinsterella, were a bit R-rated, but in this Goth Girl Summer, I've actually taken things and it's a bit more PG-13, and again, more PG-13 because, again, my goal is to get people to feel like, hey, if I read this book, there's not going to be something too racy, there's not going to be something too violent. It's just going to be, again, people like me, and I mean seeing people like myself. That's what I try to do when I'm telling stories, and I don't mind dialing it back because I can still tell a compelling story without trying to shock you with a gimmick or shock you with a stunt. No, I want you to be able to say, hey, I really enjoyed that story. I really feel comfortable with these characters. These characters feel like my friends. And the time that I spent with them, it was time that I really enjoyed. So I enjoy it so much, I want to go back and pick up the previous books. That's what I want to do as related to being a writer. And that's not something I believe I could do in the modern comic book industry. The modern comic book industry, I believe, is not a place I can go out here and tell all ages stories, or stories that families can go out here and enjoy and learn about the lives of characters. I don't believe I can tell those stories in the modern comic book industry. No, it's just so insular and so antisocial that I don't believe you can, again, tell those kinds of stories or get access to that kind of customer at the comic shop anymore, because so many people have been alienated by the comics that are produced these days. And it's a shame because, again, I remember growing up and seeing comics at the grocery store, seeing comics at the newsstand, seeing comics at the Rite Aid. I remember seeing comics basically everywhere. And when I saw them everywhere, it was just, again, you felt like, hey, I could feel safe with a character like Spider-Man, Captain America, Iron Man, the Hulk, or Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman. But when I look at these characters these days, they're a twisted reflection of today's creators who really have no understanding of how to tell the kind of stories that I want to tell. And it's a shame because, again, I really wanted to tell the kind of stories that brought people together, but sadly there's no market for those type of stories that are family-friendly PG-13 stories. Again, you can still explore different aspects of life, but sadly many today's writers, they're so caught up in trying to create the deconstructed model of Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen and many other books like that, that they're not thinking about constructing a world where people see themselves being friends with their favorite heroes and being friends with their favorite heroes and enjoying their stories and enjoying their adventures. And this is where the comic book industry is, where, again, creators like myself don't see a place for ourselves. We don't see a place for ourselves, and I don't see a place for myself in today's modern comic book industry, because the kind of storytelling that they make is not the kind of story that I want to reflect out here as my work, is not the kind of story that I want to reflect as a storyteller. No, the kind of stories that I want to tell don't go to extremes. They just show you people overcoming odds and obstacles, and people just living their everyday lives in an extraordinary way, and going out here and overcoming the odds. I want to show ordinary people overcoming the extraordinary, and again, want to do the kind of stories that are fun and family friendly, and that's the kind of story I want to tell. But sadly, there's no place for that kind of story in today's modern comic book industry, and that's why one of the other reasons why I want to walk away from comic social media. Now, if you want to pick up my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find that comic on Lulu.com in paperback, and you can get a digital version on Kindle and be able to see how I would produce a full comic. And you can also pick up the short comic, Esteem No Good Deed, which will also be another sample of my style of writing and storytelling. You can find both of those comics on Lulu and Amazon.com. And if you want to see the world that I built called the SJS Direct Universe, you can find those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. And there you can find the books of the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, and my Black sorority novel, The Thetas, my Black vampire novel, Eternal Night. And all of these books, most of them, are very safe for readers of all ages. Definitely the ISIS, Esteem, and John Haynes series books, and even books like Spellbound. Now, Spellbound has a bit more of a coarse language, but is, again, safe for older readers, about 8, 9, 10 years old and up. And again, I try to make the content as accessible for readers of all ages, and I want to make stories that anybody can go out here and read and feel safe about sharing with their family and friends. And again, you can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. And you can also find them at other online booksellers in digital format like Draft to Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you'd like to see me make more videos and be able to pay for the covers of SJS Direct books and hire comic artists, because one of the things I do is I hire comic artists to do the covers of SJS Direct books and even interiors sometimes, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.